You're the most useless child we have. Those were the first words I heard that morning. Not a greeting, not a good morning, but a sentence sharp enough to slice through years of silent endurance. My mother stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, her voice echoing across the kitchen tiles. I was wiping the counter, the same way I'd been doing since I was 12. The dish towel froze in my hand as her words settled over me like dust, familiar, heavy, and impossible to shake off. I'm the middle child, the invisible one. Not the firstborn who made her proud, not the youngest she spoiled, just the one who filled in the gaps. My brother Ryan was the business genius. Every time he walked into a room, she'd beam as if sunlight followed him. Ryan's going to be a millionaire one day. She'd tell everyone, even when his so-called businesses were just overpriced ideas and borrowed money. Then there was Lily, my mother's angel. She could burn toast and still be praised for trying. At least she's making an effort, Mom would say, smiling as if effort alone was enough to rewrite failure. When it came to me, though, effort meant nothing. If I cleaned, it was expected. If I helped, it was unnoticed. And if I ever forgot something, even something small, it was unforgivable. That morning, it was because I'd bought the wrong brand of detergent. You can't even do one simple thing right, she said, shaking her head. What do you do with your life anyway? I wanted to answer. I wanted to say that I'd been the one paying the electricity bill for the last 3 months. That it was my salary keeping this house running while Ryan researched his next startup, and Lily waited for a modeling job that never came. But the words stayed buried behind my teeth. You learn after years of being dismissed that silence is safer than truth. My mother turned away, muttering something about raising failures, and I continued wiping the counter, like a ghost cleaning up after the living. When I was younger, I used to believe her insults were tests. That maybe if I worked harder, studied more, or smiled through the pain, she'd notice me. I got straight A's in school. I earned scholarships. I worked part-time jobs just to buy my own clothes so she wouldn't have to. Still, she'd look at me as though I'd somehow made her life harder just by existing. Your siblings will make something of themselves, she'd say. You, on the other hand, just drift. But drifting, for me, meant surviving. It meant keeping the house together when Ryan forgot to pay rent. It meant hiding Lily's unpaid bills before Dad saw them. It meant pretending that I was fine when every part of me was tired of being invisible. Dad wasn't much help. He was quiet like me, but for different reasons. He'd sit in the corner with his newspaper, avoiding eye contact. I used to think he didn't notice what was happening. Now I realize he just didn't want to get involved. It's best not to argue with your mother, he'd whisper, as if silence was a kind of love. After breakfast, I left for work, my escape. I worked at a small financial firm in town, doing paperwork, managing client accounts, balancing numbers that always made more sense than people ever did. My coworkers saw me as dependable, organized, calm. No one there knew that I'd grown up learning how to keep things balanced long before I ever touched a spreadsheet. Sometimes, during lunch breaks, I'd scroll through my phone and see Ryan posting about his new venture. Photos of him at cafes, typing on a laptop he couldn't afford. Lily would post selfies captioned, "Working hard," even though her definition of work involved little more than posing and waiting. The comments would fill with praise from family friends. "Your mother must be so proud." I'd smile at the irony. She was proud, all right, just not of me, but there was something none of them knew. Behind my calm, quiet nature, I was building something of my own, something real. Every spare dollar I earned, I saved. I invested. I learned the system from the inside out. While they laughed at me for being boring, I was quietly preparing for a life that didn't need their approval. I still remember the way Mom's voice echoed that morning. "You're the most useless child we have." She said it like it was a fact, carved in stone. But I didn't argue. I just wiped the counter, folded the towel, and went to work, because deep down I knew something she didn't. One day, the useless one would be the only one who didn't need saving. When people talk about childhood, they usually remember birthdays, school plays, or family dinners. I remember silence, the kind that settles between sentences and fills every empty space. I was the quiet one at home and the invisible one at school. Teachers used to say, "Your daughter's very bright. Mrs. Hughes, you must be proud." Mom would just smile politely, her eyes already drifting toward the parents who mattered, the ones with louder children, shinier achievements and last names that opened doors. She never came to my school events, not once. Not for award ceremonies, not for report cards, not even for the scholarship announcement that changed my life. I still remember standing on that stage in my wrinkled uniform, clutching the certificate that meant freedom, looking for her face in the crowd. Rows of clapping parents filled the hall, but the only empty chair was the one that should have been hers. When I told her later that evening, breathless with excitement, she didn't even look up from her phone. "That's good," she said flatly. "Now you won't cost us anything." I remember the way my excitement withered, like a candle flickering out. For everyone else, scholarships were a badge of pride. For me, it was just another way to stop being a burden. My siblings, of course, found ways to twist it into a joke. "Our little accountant," Ryan would tease, patting my head like I was a child. "Always counting pennies. You'll probably marry a calculator one day." Lily would giggle, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "She's just jealous she's not fun like us." I learned early that fun in our house meant recklessness, spending what we didn't have, living on appearances, pretending everything was fine. I didn't fit that mold. I liked order. I liked knowing things added up. But in my mother's eyes, that made me boring. "Don't you ever want to live a little?" she'd say when I refused to go out with them. "You're wasting your youth hiding behind books. Books were safer than people." They didn't yell. They didn't lie. They didn't make you feel small for trying. My father was the quiet shadow behind it all. Not cruel, not kind, just absent in his own way. He'd sit at the kitchen table, newspaper open, pretending not to hear the arguments. Once I asked him why Mom never came to my events. He folded the paper slowly like he was buying time. "She's busy, sweetheart," he said softly. "You know how your mother is." That became the family's favorite excuse. "You know how your mother is." When I was 15, I started saving every bit of allowance I got. Not for clothes, not for gadgets, but for escape. A small secret bank account under my name. It wasn't much, just coins at first, but it was mine. Every deposit was a silent promise. I'll never depend on anyone. One day, I overheard my parents talking in the living room. Mom was laughing, that brittle laugh she used when she was showing off. "Claire? Oh, she's the sensible one. Won't ever be rich, won't ever be famous, but she'll always have enough to get by." It was meant as a compliment, but it cut deeper than any insult. Enough to get by. That was all I was to her. The background child, the filler between her stars. The next morning, I found one of my school essays crumpled on the counter. Ryan had read it out loud at dinner the night before, mocking every line. "You sound like a robot," he'd said, laughing. "Do you even feel anything?" I did feel something. I just learned not to show it. Years later, I'd come to understand that my mother's approval was like a mirage, always visible from afar, never reachable up close. She praised Ryan's ambition even when it led nowhere, adored Lily's charm even when it cost her pride, and dismissed my achievements because they didn't serve her image. But I kept studying. I kept showing up. I kept winning, quietly, without celebration. And in every silent victory, I felt the same mix of pride and emptiness. Success without love is just survival with better wallpaper. The scholarship took me out of that house for a while. I remember the day I left for college. My bags by the door, the taxi waiting outside. Mom didn't come downstairs. Lily waved lazily from the couch. Only Dad appeared in the doorway, holding out an envelope. "For emergencies," he said. His eyes looked tired, almost apologetic. That was the closest thing to love I got. In college, I learned what independence really felt like. I worked part-time jobs, managed my own expenses, and never called home unless necessary. Freedom wasn't glamorous. It was lonely, sometimes painful, but it was honest. Every bill I paid, every meal I earned was mine. Still, every once in a while, her words would echo in my head. "That's good. Now you won't cost us anything." So I made a vow. If the only way to earn peace in that family was to stop being a cost, then I'd stop being theirs altogether. I would build a life so self-sufficient that even my mother couldn't call me useless anymore. When I left home for college, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I had already run out of tears years ago. The city was 3 hours away, a quiet town near the coast with gray mornings and coffee shops that smelled like burnt sugar. My dorm room was small, one creaky bed, a single desk, and a window that faced a brick wall. Still, it felt enormous compared to the silence I had grown up in. No one called that first week. Not my mother, not my father, not even Lily or Ryan. The absence didn't surprise me, but it still stung. I told myself they were busy, that families like ours didn't say, "I miss you." We just kept living. I started working part-time at a local diner after classes. The pay was barely enough for rent and textbooks, but I liked the rhythm. The clatter of dishes, the smell of coffee refills, the faint hum of the radio that played old love songs between orders. It kept my mind steady. I'd serve customers until midnight, then walk back to the dorm with sore feet and a kind of tiredness that felt clean. Earned. Every month, on the first Monday, I wired a portion of my earnings back home. "For Mom's medicine," I'd write in the memo line. She never asked for it directly, but Dad had mentioned once that she was struggling with her health. The least I could do, I thought, was help. She never said thank you. Not once. But I kept sending it anyway. In those early years, I learned to measure love through action, not words. Paying her bills was my way of saying, "I still care, even if you don't." Classes were hard, but numbers made sense to me. They didn't change their meaning depending on who asked. They didn't lie or twist. 2 plus 2 was always 4, reliable, clean, fair. That's why I chose finance. I wanted to understand the rules that governed value because people never seemed to have any. While others in class talked about profit margins and investments, I was thinking about something else entirely: survival. I wanted to know how to stretch a single paycheck across 31 days, how to make one decision that could keep you safe for years. At night, after my shifts, I'd sit by the window with my notebook open, tracking every dollar: rent, food, tuition, transfers home. I wasn't rich, but I was disciplined. That was my inheritance. Discipline born from neglect. Once, during my second year, I went home for a weekend. The house looked smaller, but Mom's tone was exactly the same. "Oh, Claire," she said as I walked in. "You should have called. I didn't cook extra." Dinner was a performance. Ryan bragged about a business idea that had already failed twice. Lily showed off her new shoes. Mom hung on their every word. When I tried to mention my studies, the scholarship, the internship I'd earned, she waved her hand. "That's nice, dear. But don't overwork yourself. You'll age faster." After dinner, I quietly slipped an envelope onto the kitchen counter. Inside was the cash I'd saved for her medication. She saw it, but didn't say anything. Later that night, I overheard her on the phone with a relative, laughing. "Claire's the practical one," she said, "always trying to make up for what she lacks." That line stayed with me for years: make up for what she lacks. It became the background hum of my life, the reason I worked harder, stayed longer, saved more. By the time I graduated, I had 2 jobs and a near-perfect GPA. My professors called me reliable. My classmates called me boring. I didn't mind. Boring kept the lights on. After graduation, I found an entry-level position at a financial firm downtown. The pay wasn't much, but it came with structure and health insurance. Luxuries I'd never known. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and one narrow window that faced the morning sun. Every dawn, when the light poured through, I'd stand there with my coffee and whisper to myself, "This is mine." Still, the habit of sending money home never stopped. The amounts grew. $50, then $100, then $200 every month. It became routine, like breathing. I didn't even question it. Somewhere deep down, I still believed that if I kept giving, if I proved my worth in numbers, maybe one day she'd see me differently. My voiceover tone, if I had one back then, would have been calm, almost detached. If love could be earned, maybe success could buy me a little respect. But love and respect were never in the same account. I was just making deposits that would never pay interest. Still, I kept going. Because when no one calls, you learn to answer yourself. When no one sees your effort, you make peace with the quiet. It wasn't revenge that drove me. Not yet. It was survival. A quiet, stubborn resilience that whispered, "Keep going, even if no one ever says your name with pride." And I did. I kept going, until the day I realized my mother wasn't just living because of my help. She was living on it. When I first stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the bank, I remember thinking, this is where grown-ups work. It smelled like coffee and ambition. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My boss, Mr. Allen, was one of those men who could read people within seconds. Maybe that's why he looked at me on my first day and said, "You've got careful hands. Let's see what you do with numbers." I didn't know then that this simple trust, this tiny vote of confidence, would become the foundation of my new life. Every morning, I arrived before everyone else. While others gossiped over coffee, I was already checking accounts, balancing ledgers, and learning everything I could about investments. It wasn't easy. I had no connections, no family cheering me on, just quiet hunger. But with every paycheck, I felt a spark of dignity. The first month, I bought myself a proper pair of shoes. The second month, I opened my own savings account. And by the third month, I was investing small, a few dollars here and there, just to feel what it meant to grow something that was truly mine. Mr. Allen noticed. One afternoon, he called me into his office and handed me a file. "These are some of our VIP clients," he said. "You'll be handling their savings accounts from now on." My heart almost stopped. I was barely 21, and here I was, trusted with people's life savings. I nodded, trying to look calm, but inside I was trembling with pride. From that day, I worked like my future depended on every decimal point, because it did. At night, when I walked back to my small rented room, I'd pass by families having dinner through their windows, laughter, clinking glasses, children running around. And every time I whispered to myself, "You'll build this one day, but it'll be your version of family." Meanwhile, my own siblings were busy self-destructing. My brother James lost his job again, something about bad luck at the casino. My sister Liza jumped from job to job, chasing quick money and posting fake luxury photos online. Mom would call me occasionally, but never to ask how I was doing. It was always the same line. "Honey, could you send me just a little something? We're short this month." At first I thought, she's my mother. I can't say no. So I sent money. Every single time. Sometimes $50, sometimes $200. Even when I could barely afford groceries, I'd transfer it quietly, telling myself, maybe this will make her proud. But pride never came. Just more requests. One evening, after a 12-hour shift, I got her call again. Her voice was sweet. Too sweet. "You're doing so well now, aren't you? Your brother needs some help with rent." I looked at my account, at the tiny pool of savings I'd been nurturing like a fragile plant, and my stomach twisted. Still, I said yes, because saying yes was easier than accepting the truth. She didn't love me. She loved what I could give. At work, I channeled that ache into effort. If I couldn't earn love, I'd earn respect. Mr. Allen once said during A team meeting, success isn't about what you get, it's about what you can keep. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I started reading about personal finance, compound interest, real estate, every night until my eyes burned. While my siblings scrolled social media, I scrolled stock charts. Little by little, my balance grew. Not fast, but steady. Like me. There were moments I wanted to call Mom and tell her everything. How my boss trusted me, how clients thanked me, how I finally felt enough. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew the response. That's great, honey. By the way, could you help me with the electricity bill? So instead, I wrote those words in a notebook, all the things I wanted to hear from her. You did great. I'm proud of you. You turned out fine on your own. I never sent them. But I read them whenever the silence got too heavy. Years later, I would look back on this chapter of my life and realize I wasn't just building a career. I was building walls. Walls to protect myself from disappointment. Walls made of numbers, effort, and independence. And behind those walls, something powerful was taking root. The version of me who no longer needed approval, only peace. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. I was at my desk, approving a client loan when my phone buzzed. Mom. I hesitated before answering. Her calls never came with good news, only guilt wrapped in sugar. Sweetheart, she began, her voice trembling. Your brother's business. It's gone. Everything. He made some bad deals. We're losing the house. I froze. I'd heard whispers before that James was playing big man, taking loans, making investments. But I never thought it would come to this. Bad deals? I asked quietly. Or gambling again? Silence. Then her voice cracked. He's your brother. He just needs help. You've always been the smart one, the steady one. Please, you're the only one we can count on. And just like that, I became their lifeline. Again. That night, I sat in my small apartment with the rain tapping on the window, staring at my bank statement. The savings I'd built through sleepless nights, my quiet badge of independence, were about to disappear. I could have said no. I should have said no, but I didn't, because some part of me still believed that saving them might finally make me belong. So I called the bank, pulled my personal funds, and arranged to pay off the foreclosure notice that hung over my family home. I didn't even tell them how much I'd spent. I just told Mom, it's handled. There was a pause, and then she sighed with relief. That's what family does. No thank you. No apology, just expectation. A week later, I visited them, the first time in months. The house looked the same. Peeling paint, untrimmed bushes, the same broken porch light that never got fixed. But when I stepped inside, I could feel something had shifted. Not gratitude, but resentment. James sat slouched on the couch, scrolling his phone. Liza hovered nearby, whispering about how unfair life was. Mom poured herself coffee and said almost casually, You're lucky, you know. Some people just have good fortune. Good fortune. As if the endless overtime, the skipped meals, the nights crying alone, were luck. I smiled politely. But inside something cracked. That night, as I drove back home, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. The windshield wipers moved back and forth like a pendulum, steady, relentless. And I realized something that made my stomach twist. They didn't love me. They just needed me. Every time they failed, they looked for me to patch it up. Every time they cried family, what they really meant was convenience. And I was their safety net. A few weeks later, my brother called. Hey sis, you're good with money, right? I've got this new idea. If you invest just a bit, we could both win. I almost laughed. I'd barely recovered from saving their home, and here he was, already plotting another opportunity. When I didn't answer, his tone hardened. You think you're better than us now, huh? Just because you've got a bank job? That was the moment it clicked. The truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as funds. At work, Mr. Allen noticed my quietness. He stopped by my desk one morning and said gently, "You can't save everyone, you know. Sometimes, helping too much keeps people broken." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That family meant sacrifice. That love meant giving. But deep down, I knew he was right. The next time Mom called, I didn't pick up right away. I let it ring, twice, 3 times, and as I stared at the screen flashing her name, I thought about all the years I spent earning approval that never came, the birthdays they forgot, the holidays I spent alone, the fake warmth that appeared only when their wallets were empty. "Finally," I answered. Her tone was sharp this time. "Why didn't you answer?" "James is upset. You could have helped him a little." I took a breath and said, "Mom, I already did." She sighed. "That's what family does." I almost said it back. But something inside me whispered, "Not anymore." That night, I sat by my window with the city lights flickering below, and I made a promise to myself. I would still help where I could. But never at the cost of my peace again, because sometimes love isn't about giving everything you have. It's about learning when to stop. And for the first time in my life, I began to stop. Mom's voice was soft that morning, softer than I'd heard in years. It was the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. "Sweetheart," she began, "I've been thinking, with everything that's happened, we need to be smarter. A family account, something stable. You're good with money. You can manage it." I hesitated. The idea sounded harmless, even noble. But the way she said family always made me wary. "Family account?" I repeated. "Like joint access?" She smiled. "Exactly. You're responsible, and it's not like we'll touch it without reason. Just a little fund. For the house, for groceries, maybe your brother's recovery." I wanted to believe her. After all, this was what I'd always wanted, to be trusted. To finally be part of the family, not just the invisible provider behind it. So I agreed. At the bank, I set it up. A new joint account with my name listed first, theirs beneath. I arranged automatic transfers, a portion of my paycheck each month. I told myself it was practical. I told myself it was love. And for a while, things actually felt peaceful. Mom called me more often, even to ask how my day was. Liza sent me photos of new curtains for the living room. James occasionally texted, "Thanks, sis. You're holding us together." Those tiny crumbs of affection felt like a feast, but deep down I knew they weren't feeding love. They were feeding dependence. Months passed. I watched that account like a hawk, my deposits stacking. Their withdrawals flowing like water. Every week, something new. The fridge broke. James needs car repairs. Mom's medicine price went up. At first, I asked for receipts. Then I stopped. Because every time I questioned it, the guilt came flooding in. "You don't trust your own family?" Mom would sigh. "After all we've been through?" So I stayed quiet. And silence became the rent I paid for peace. One afternoon, I stopped by their house. James was watching TV, a brand new flat screen. Liza's nails were fresh from the salon. Mom was wearing gold bangles I'd never seen before. My stomach twisted. I asked, "Did we get a new TV?" James didn't even look up. "Yeah, Liza found it on sale." "You're welcome, by the way. Your money made it happen." They all laughed. I stood there, smiling faintly, pretending it didn't sting. Inside, though, a voice whispered something sharp. "They called you useless, but they live on your effort." That night, I checked the account. Half of my monthly salary was gone, transferred in small amounts, perfectly timed to avoid suspicion. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Instead, I started keeping records. Every transaction, every emergency, every excuse. And as the months turned into years, I built not just their financial safety net, but also the silent evidence of how they used me. They mocked me even as they lived off me. Mom would joke to her friends, "My middle one? She's not very social. All she does is work. But thank God she's reliable. Reliable. Not loved." Not respected. Just useful. Once at a family dinner, Liza leaned over and whispered, "You should really loosen up. Not everything's about saving. Maybe you'd have a boyfriend if you didn't act like a banker 24/7. They all laughed, even Mom. And there I sat, smiling politely while paying for the meal. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who called me useless couldn't survive a week without me. Over time, I learned to hide my emotions behind numbers. I'd log into the account, transfer funds, and feel nothing. It was just data. Income, outflow, zero affection attached. But beneath that robotic calm, something was brewing, slow, steady, and dangerous. A kind of quiet rage that comes not from one big betrayal, but from years of small ones stacked neatly on top of each other. Then one evening, I overheard something that turned that quiet rage into clarity. Mom was on the phone with Liza. She didn't realize I'd entered the room. "She thinks she's the head of the house just because her name's on the account," Mom laughed. "Let her. As long as the money keeps coming, she can call herself whatever she wants." They both laughed, sharp, cold laughter that filled the room like smoke. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, invisible as always. But that night, for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt something else. Control. Because now I understood the real balance of power. They thought I was the fool keeping them afloat. But I was the one holding the lifeline. And when the time came, I could pull it back. That night, I logged into the joint account one last time. I stared at the numbers glowing on my screen, the evidence of every manipulation disguised as trust. I whispered to myself, "You called me useless, but every light in that house burns because of me." And then, for the first time, I smiled. It was late. The house dark except for the dim glow of the kitchen light where Mom and Liza were whispering. I had gone in to drop off a check for groceries. Part of the joint account routine I'd followed for years. I lingered by the doorway, pretending to look at a vase. Then I heard it. "If only your brother disappeared, we'd be better off," Mom said softly, almost gleefully. "He thinks he owns us just because he pays the bills." Liza giggled, nodding in agreement. My hands froze on the envelope I was holding. The paper slipped, and I caught it just in time. I stepped back into the shadows, my heart hammering. The room smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. Ordinary scents, ordinary life, but the words felt like acid. Years of quiet sacrifice, sleepless nights, missed birthdays, every dollar I had ever transferred to them. They didn't see me. They didn't care. I was invisible until my money was useful. I returned to my apartment that night, and everything felt heavier than usual. The joint account ledger sat open on my desk. I stared at the numbers. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every emergency they had ever manufactured. My hands trembled as I traced them, the lines of digits blurring. For the first time, I felt anger that wasn't buried under politeness or hope. For the first time, I felt betrayal in its purest, sharpest form. I closed the ledger slowly. The snap of the binder felt louder than it should have, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I had been writing for decades. Enough. That night, I made a decision. I was done. Done being the invisible wallet that kept their lives afloat. Done sacrificing my own peace for a family that didn't see me as a person. Done believing that my love could buy approval or respect. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront them. I simply began preparing quietly. First, I opened a private account, completely separate. I transferred a portion of my savings into it, small amounts at first, testing the waters. It felt illicit, exhilarating, like claiming a tiny corner of the world that belonged only to me. Then, I looked at my apartment lease. The walls were thin, the carpet frayed, but it was mine. I started making a list of things I needed. Locks changed, emergency funds, a place where no one could touch me without permission. Step by step, I created a fortress. Not of steel or bricks, but of financial autonomy and boundaries. Every deposit I made into my private account felt like a reclaiming of self. Every dollar was a small declaration: I exist. I have worth. My love is not a currency to be spent without reciprocity. I remembered the words I'd once whispered to myself. If love could be earned, maybe success could buy me a little respect. Now I understood the truth. Love isn't earned through sacrifice. It's given freely, and when it's not, it isn't love at all. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the times I'd been dismissed, ignored, mocked. The quiet rage simmered alongside a strange sense of relief. Because finally, I had a plan. A path that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. A life where I wouldn't feel bankrupt from giving. Love shouldn't feel like bankruptcy, I whispered to myself, letting the words sink in. By the next morning, I had already started organizing my schedule. Small tasks, meeting with the bank for new account security, reviewing investments, planning for independent bills, became acts of liberation. I wasn't angry in the loud, dramatic way. I was measured, calculating, quietly resolute. The family who had called me useless still existed, and still depended on me. But no longer would I exist solely to feed their needs. That realization was heavier than any weight I'd carried before. But it was mine, and as I brewed my morning coffee, the sun spilling soft gold across my small kitchen, I finally understood. Peace doesn't come from approval. It comes from boundaries, from saying no without guilt, from standing firm even when everyone else expects you to give everything. That day, I began the long, quiet process of reclaiming not just my money, but my life. The bank smelled the same as it had when I first walked in. Fresh coffee mingling with polished wood and paper. The marble floors gleamed, the quiet hum of computers and printers punctuating the air. This was my territory, the place where I had built my career, my independence, one careful decision at a time. I walked to my old teller's window, took a deep breath, and asked for the joint account ledger. "I'd like to close this account," I said calmly, as if ordering tea at a cafe. The clerk looked at me, eyebrows raising ever so slightly, and nodded. She didn't know the story. She didn't need to. The power in that moment wasn't in her understanding. It was in me claiming what I'd quietly earned for years. I pulled out my pen. The signature line stared back at me, blank and expectant. I thought of every dollar I'd sent, every emergency I'd covered, every late night balancing their bills while my own dreams waited. I thought of the times they'd laughed, mocked, and ignored me. Of Mom calling me useless while depending on me to survive. I pressed the pen to the paper. And in that instant, my signature wasn't just a name. It wasn't just a transaction. It was closure. My signature looked like closure, I whispered to myself, letting the words taste like liberation. The teller slid the paperwork back across the counter. I smiled politely. No one celebrated. No one shouted, and that was perfect. I asked for a transfer. Everything remaining in the account, the last dollars they had relied on, went directly into my private fund. Mine. All mine. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under streetlights, reflections dancing like tiny fires across the asphalt. I thought about Mom, James, Liza, all of them, waiting for money that would never come. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That night, their calls began. Mom first, frantic. "Why can't I withdraw? The card isn't working. What's going on?" I waited a beat before answering, letting the echo of all the years of neglect hang between us. Then softly, "I guess the useless one finally did something." There was a pause. Then the screams came, sharp and high-pitched. "You ungrateful child! How could you do this to your family?" I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't apologize. I simply said again, calmly, "I'm done." The silence that followed wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was peaceful. The kind of silence you feel in your chest when the weight of years suddenly lifts, leaving only air and clarity. I poured myself a cup of tea, the mug warm between my hands. Outside, the city lights twinkled quietly. For years, I had been invisible, unseen except as a source of funds and labor. Now, I existed. Not because they noticed me, not because they praised me, not because they depended on me, but simply because I had claimed my space, my agency, my life. I thought about the bills I had covered for them, the dinners I had quietly paid for, the nights I had lain awake balancing numbers instead of sleeping. And for the first time, none of it mattered because the power had shifted. I wasn't just the quiet provider anymore. I was the one holding the truth, that they had always relied on me, not loved me, and I had finally stepped out from under their shadow. The phone stopped ringing. I sat by the window listening to the quiet hum of the city. The clock ticked. The house was still, and I realized I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need their gratitude. I didn't even need their forgiveness. All I needed was this moment, the first real breath of freedom I'd had in decades. Sometimes, I whispered, peace isn't given. It's taken, I sipped my tea. The warmth spread through my chest. And for the first time in my life, I felt complete. The calls started the morning after I closed the account. One, then two, then a flurry that refused to stop. James was first. You owe us. You can't just, this isn't fair. We needed that money. His voice cracked somewhere between anger and panic, but it carried the same sense of entitlement I had known all my life. I let it ring in my ears, the words bouncing off the walls of my apartment. Mom called next. Her sobs were sharp, practiced, almost theatrical. You've ruined everything. Our family. It's over. How could you? I paused, listening to the raw emotion, the chaos I had helped create. The familiar tug of guilt, the one that had guided me for decades, pulled at my chest. I remembered the evenings when I had lain awake, wondering if I was wrong to demand boundaries. The birthdays I had missed, the holidays spent alone, the hundreds of transfers I had made without acknowledgement. The quiet voice inside me whispered, maybe you should apologize. Maybe you could fix this. For a moment, I almost dialed back, almost gave in, but I didn't. I sat on my sofa, staring at the muted television, letting the guilt wash over me like a tide. It rolled in, sharp and cold, and then slowly receded, leaving clarity behind. I didn't do this to punish them. I did this to save myself. The next days were quieter. Mom left voicemails, some pleading, some accusing. James sent text after text, demanding explanations, begging for help, claiming I had destroyed everything. Liza didn't call, but the group chat lit up with passive-aggressive comments about my sudden attitude and selfishness. I read them once, then deleted the notifications. They didn't need to see me. I didn't need to respond. I walked through my apartment slowly, noticing the small details that I had overlooked in the rush of caring for everyone else. The kettle on the stove, slightly chipped but functional. A stack of unopened mail, mine, not theirs. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint scent of morning coffee lingering in the air. It was quiet. Not lonely. Not empty. For the first time, silence didn't mean absence. It meant peace. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, letting the city lights flicker in the distance. The world felt ordinary, yet entirely mine. No one needed me to fix their mistakes. No one depended on me to make their lives bearable. I realized something I hadn't understood before. The weight I had carried all these years wasn't money. It wasn't bills or bank statements or late-night transfers. It was the constant need to earn their love, and now that weight was gone. Of course, a part of me still ached. The daughter who had craved approval, who had been told she was useless, still lingered quietly. Her voice whispered in the background, soft but persistent. They are family. They might forgive you. You could try, I acknowledged her. I didn't silence her. I simply let her rest. Because I had learned something vital. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I didn't need their love to justify my existence. Days turned into a week. The calls stopped. The threats and pleading faded into voicemail silence, and I discovered an unfamiliar sensation, the joy of life unburdened. I cooked dinner for myself without accounting for anyone else's tastes. I folded laundry without a mind toward invisible judgments. I walked through my apartment, opening windows to let in fresh air, savoring the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. That night, as I sipped my tea by the window, I whispered a truth I had never admitted to anyone, not even myself. I am enough. I always was. I just needed to stop giving away what was mine to feel it. The city lights twinkled back, indifferent and beautiful. And I smiled, not out of triumph, but out of relief. For the first time, I was free. The silence no longer echoed with neglect or shame. It hummed with possibility, with choice, with self-respect. The morning sun spilled through the blinds of my new office, soft and steady, as if it had waited years for me to arrive. I had taken the leap, leaving the bank, leaving behind the rigid structure that had once been my only lifeline, and starting my own consultancy firm. The walls were bare, except for a single framed certificate from my finance studies and a small potted plant I had named Clara. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Everything in this space belonged to me. My decisions, my time, my energy. Clients began arriving, drawn by my reputation at the bank. Word had traveled quietly. She's meticulous. She's discreet. She's trustworthy. I walked them through strategies, budgets, and investment plans with calm precision. No one questioned my expertise. No one belittled me. I was seen, respected, and relied upon, not because I gave endlessly, but because I delivered competence and care. One afternoon, I noticed a young associate lingering by my desk. She reminded me of myself, quiet, meticulous, unsure of her place. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for this," she admitted. I smiled, remembering the girl I had once been, the one who thought love could be earned with numbers and patience. "You're stronger than you know," I said softly. "Kindness isn't weakness. It's knowing where to place your energy and when to protect it." Later, she came by again, a little more confident, and said, "You're the kindest boss I've met." Her words hit me in the chest like a warm hand resting on a wound that had long since healed. Validation. I had never received from family, never expected to receive, now came from someone who saw me for me. I realized something vital. The kindness I had once offered blindly was not wasted. It was simply misdirected. Boundaries had been the missing ingredient, the line that allowed me to care without losing myself. Now, I could mentor young workers, guide clients, and manage my life without fear that my efforts would be exploited. I had learned that generosity is most meaningful when it is intentional, not coerced. Days passed in a rhythm I had never known. Calm mornings, productive afternoons, evenings filled with small domestic joys. I cooked for myself, keeping notes of recipes I had once ignored. I watered Clara each day, watching her leaves stretch toward the sun. I even started a journal, not of expenses or accounts, but of gratitude, reflections, and ideas for the future. One evening, I paused by the window, looking out at the city lights. Their quiet twinkle mirrored in my own sense of accomplishment. I thought of Mom, of James, of Liza, and the past that had weighed so heavily on me. I did not feel bitterness anymore. I did not crave revenge. I simply understood. "Love," I whispered, "doesn't need proof in dollars or deeds. It thrives in respect, trust, and boundaries." That was the lesson I carried into every conversation, every decision, every moment. I had rebuilt not just my career, but myself. The consultancy grew steadily. Young clients, sometimes unsure and timid, looked to me for guidance. Older clients, cautious and practical, valued my integrity. And in every meeting, in every phone call, I reminded myself, I am enough. I do not have to overextend to earn my worth. At home, I took small joys seriously. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the sun paint the sky in pale gold and rose. A quiet walk to the nearby market, greeting neighbors who smiled at recognition, not obligation. Evening stretches beside Clara, whispering little hopes and observing her growth as a gentle echo of my own. These were ordinary acts, but they carried extraordinary meaning. Freedom is quiet, independence is deliberate. Peace is earned slowly, in moments repeated, measured, and cherished. Before bed, I wrote a short note in my journal. I am free. I am seen, I am enough. My kindness is mine to give and mine to protect. Boundaries are not walls, they are the doorways to self-respect. I closed the journal, the pen resting lightly in my hand. For the first time in decades, I slept without a trace of guilt, without a shadow of obligation. The past remained, but it no longer ruled me. And in that calm, reflective silence, I finally felt the fullness of life I had worked so long to reclaim. It had been nearly 2 years since I closed the account. 2 years of quiet mornings, productive afternoons, and evenings spent reclaiming my life. The rhythm of independence had become second nature. A steady pulse I had finally learned to trust. Then one Thursday, the familiar tension returned. The office door opened, and there they were. Mom, James, and Liza, all three standing awkwardly in my reception area. The same people who had once ignored my existence now stared at me as though I were some untouchable monument. Mom's eyes were wet. James looked sheepish. Liza, ever the observer, shifted from foot to foot, unsure how to act. We didn't realize," Mom began, her voice trembling. "We were wrong about you." I held her gaze, polite, measured. Inside, I felt the faint tug of old habits, the instinct to apologize, to reassure, to take responsibility for their feelings. I ignored it. "Maybe you were right," I said softly. I was useless to people who only knew how to take. The words hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, the past seemed to flicker back. The years of unpaid bills, of sacrifices unnoticed, of late nights balancing accounts that weren't mine to manage. But this time, I didn't feel the old ache. I felt clarity. They spoke quickly, almost pleading, explaining their financial missteps, their latest crises. James talked about loans, Liza about mounting bills, Mom about how overwhelmed she felt. All I heard was noise. Not the words themselves, but the pattern. Reliance without responsibility, expectation without reciprocity. I reached for my pen and a checkbook. Not the joint account, not the years of silent service. Just a small settlement, enough to cover their immediate debts, a gesture of pragmatism rather than forgiveness. "This will help you for now," I said, handing over the check. "Beyond that, you'll need to manage yourselves." Mom's hands trembled as she took it. She wanted more. Gratitude, a hug, an acknowledgement of her newfound humility. I gave none. I gave distance, and with it, my peace. They lingered, unsure how to respond to my calm. I noticed the small details. The wrinkle in Mom's sleeve, the nervous tapping of James's fingers, Liza glancing at the framed certificate on my wall. All of them evidence of a life they hadn't prepared for, a life I had quietly built without them. "You've really made something of yourself," Mom whispered, almost inaudible. I nodded politely. It was enough to acknowledge their words without inviting reconciliation. Respect isn't always earned by apologies or hugs. Sometimes it's earned by simply existing on your own terms. I walked them to the door. No dramatics, no lecture, no tears. Just measured steps, calm breathing, and the steady click of my heels on the hardwood floor. Before they left, I said one last thing. "I hope you find the independence you didn't allow me to have." And then I turned, closing the office door behind them. The sound echoed faintly, a punctuation mark to a chapter of my life that had defined me for too long. I returned to my desk, the soft hum of the office computer and the faint scent of coffee grounding me in the present. The sun outside filtered through the blinds in warm stripes, touching the corners of my office that were entirely mine. I poured myself a cup of tea, watching the steam rise, small and deliberate, A reminder that peace is often quiet rather than loud. The guilt that might have come once, the old, familiar urge to over-explain or to placate, was gone. In its place was clarity, a steady pulse of self-respect. Recognition isn't reconciliation, I murmured to myself. And that's perfectly fine. The past had its moment, but it no longer ruled me. I had built a life beyond their expectations, beyond their influence. I had learned that generosity doesn't require surrender, that kindness can coexist with boundaries, and that self-worth is not measured by how much others take. I took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. Outside, the city lights flickered as evening settled, and for the first time in years I smiled, not at them, not for them, but for myself. The sunlight spilled through the wide windows of my new home, soft and warm, washing over the pale walls and polished wooden floors. It was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the gentle rustle of leaves outside. I ran my fingers along the smooth edges of the deed I had signed just days before. For years I had cleaned floors, scrubbed countertops, balanced bills, and managed every household task for a family that never acknowledged me. Now those same hands held something entirely mine. I found a spot on the wall and hung the framed deed beside an old, slightly faded family photograph. In that picture, I was the middle child, overlooked, invisible, the useless one. Now, the new frame shone next to it, a quiet testament to the life I had built with care, patience, and perseverance. The living room smelled faintly of fresh paint and sunlight. I walked barefoot across the floor, feeling the boards beneath my feet, solid and warm. Every corner, every window, every beam had been chosen, planned, or renovated by me. This house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was freedom. I placed a small teacup on the counter, the same one I had used for decades during my quiet mornings alone, balancing checkbooks and paying bills for people who didn't care. It seemed almost poetic that it had returned to a space where it could sit in peace, undisturbed, a small relic of survival. They called me useless, I whispered, touching the frame. But from their ashes, I built something that finally belonged to me. I walked through the rooms slowly, savoring the calm. The kitchen gleamed, spotless but lived in. The bedroom was simple, comfortable, exactly how I wanted it, a reflection of years of quiet decision-making. Even the garden outside, small but flourishing, was a product of my care, a reminder that growth is possible when nurtured patiently. Neighbors waved as I carried a small box of plants to the front porch. I smiled back quietly without haste. I didn't need applause. The validation I craved for years had shifted. It came from knowing that I had built this life entirely on my own terms. I placed the deed on the mantel, letting it lean against the wall. Sunlight hit it just right, casting a golden glow over the paper. It felt symbolic, the proof of effort, of endurance, of resilience. No one had given me this. No one had taught me to claim it. I had done it. Even the echoes of Mom's voice, James's complaints, Liza's judgments, and the years of silence felt distant now, like shadows at the edge of a room bathed in light. I acknowledged them once more, quietly, and let them go. In the living room, I set up my small writing desk. Here, I could record my thoughts, plan my consultancy, or simply write letters I'd never send. The desk faced the window, where morning light spilled across the pages, a daily reminder that life could be quiet, reflective, and wholly my own. I sank into the chair and sipped tea from the small cup I had carried through decades of labor and neglect. It felt warm, grounding, and infinitely satisfying. I was present. I was whole. I was recognized by myself, if no one else. Useful? I whispered softly, letting the word roll over me. Not the word they had used. Not the twisted irony of a label given in neglect, but the true meaning of it, that I had made something of value out of my life, my effort, and my choices. The house was no longer just a building. It was the culmination of years of quiet sacrifice, resilience, and self-discovery. It was proof that I had reclaimed agency over my own life. And in that light-filled, sun-drenched space, I finally felt the weight lift entirely. For the first time, the word useless had no power over me. All that remained was freedom, peace, and the knowledge that what I had built would endure. A life, a home, a story entirely my own. I poured another cup of tea and smiled, letting the warmth fill me. The house had become my symbol, my sanctuary, my quiet justice. And in that moment, I knew. I was, at last, truly useful. The sun had dipped low, casting long, golden stripes across my living room. I was sitting at my small writing desk, a cup of tea steaming gently beside me, when the phone rang. The screen lit up. Mom. For a moment I stared at it. Her name, familiar yet distant, a reminder of decades spent trying to earn her approval. But there was no rush, no impulse to answer. No anger, no hate, no bitterness, only calm. I watched it ring, once, twice, 3 times, and I realized something fundamental. Some moments of closure don't need words. Some apologies aren't necessary. Sometimes closure is simply choosing silence. I placed the phone face down on the desk and stood, stretching lightly. The faint scent of the tea mingled with the warm glow of the evening light. Outside, the neighborhood settled into quiet. Distant laughter, a car passing slowly, leaves rustling in the breeze. I walked to the window, resting my hands on the sill, letting the light fall across my face. I could feel the freedom in my chest, the slow, steady beat of a life finally my own. I am enough, I whispered softly, more to myself than anyone else. I always have been. The phone continued to ring in the background, but I didn't move. I didn't need to. For years, I had measured my worth against their approval, their recognition, their gratitude. Now I measured it against my own strength, my own peace, my own life reclaimed, and in that quiet moment, I smiled faintly. The sunlight faded to a soft evening glow, and I felt it fully, free at last. No one else could take this from me. No one else could define me. I turned away from the window, back to my tea, my journal, my small sanctuary. The ringing stopped eventually, and I knew, finally, that silence could be the most powerful voice of all.